You're watching World Insight. Welcome back to the second part in this program. Now, this week is a special week for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, otherwise known as NATO, as it turns 60 years old. The French city of Strasbourg and the German cities of Kiel and Baden-Baden co-hosted a summit. The alliance has grown in the past 6 decades, but its enemies are less well defined. Reflecting the past and defining the future, NATO is now rethinking its role. What should it do to make sure that it remains relevant?
A long road to mission's end in Afghanistan. For these men and 62,000 other international soldiers based here, the enemy is terrorism. Since NATO took command of the International Security Assistance Force in 2003, the reach of its mission has grown from Kabul to all of Afghanistan. Reaching South Asia may not be what NATO founders had in mind 60 years ago. 12 Western powers sought collective defense when they signed the North Atlantic Treaty in Washington in 1949. The task was straightforward: oppose the rising threat of the Soviet Union. But the Soviet Union fell in 1991. So what new purpose might NATO serve? The remnants of the buildings in Yugoslavia's capital, Belgrade, are now something of a tourist attraction. But for its people, they are painful reminders of recent history. On March 24, 1999, sirens went off in the early evening hours. NATO bombed Belgrade, forcing Serb forces to end their bloody campaign against Kosovo's ethnic Albanians. The onslaught lasted for 78 days, but without a UN mandate. As NATO turned 50, it went from defensive to active interventionism. After the 9/11 attacks, the U.S. launched a war to dismantle the operations of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. NATO took up the challenge of fighting terrorism. And NATO is also going global.
Today we proudly welcome Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania.
In 2004, NATO welcomed 7 Eastern European countries in its biggest enlargement. The original 12 members of 1949 have grown to 26. And when NATO turned 60 this year, Albania and Croatia joined the party. Still more, like Ukraine and Georgia, are lining up. Non-NATO nations like South Korea, Japan, Australia, Sweden and Finland have been welcomed by the U.S. in the name of a global partnership. The global trend has many critics worrying that the world's largest military alliance will challenge the authority of the United Nations. NATO's old foe, Russia, is on the alert, and the Kremlin opposes U.S. plans for a missile defense shield in parts of Eastern Europe.
All this requires a modernization of our armed forces, giving them a new modern shape. The primary task is to increase the combat readiness of our forces. First of all, our strategic nuclear forces, they must be able to fulfill all the necessary tasks to ensure Russia's security.
Ties were suspended over NATO's response to Moscow's invasion of the former Soviet Republic of Georgia in 2008. NATO continues to strongly disagree with a number of those actions, including its recognition of Georgia's breakaway regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia.
Some Eastern European countries in the NATO still have the traditional security concept that takes Russia as a threat, but it is not widely accepted among the NATO member states. NATO is recognizing their ability is limited when facing the global challenge. NATO is becoming more practical.
NATO foreign ministers have agreed to restoring normal relations.
We have many things on which we disagree, but NATO needs Russia and Russia needs NATO.
The U.S. has welcomed the move, but left the door open for membership by Ukraine and Georgia.
This administration, my administration, is seeking a reset of the relationship with Russia, but in a way that's consistent with NATO membership and consistent with the need to send a clear signal throughout Europe that we are going to continue to abide by the central belief that countries who seek and aspire to join NATO are able to join NATO.
Analysts say behind NATO's efforts to expand to Asia and worldwide is pressure from the U.S. as the real leader of the alliance. But they may have reckoned without France. In 1966, President Charles de Gaulle withdrew France from NATO's military command wing. He feared America's growing dominance would erode French independence. But this year, France returned.
The alliance will benefit from the relationship between France and NATO, but Europe will benefit from it too, as will France. It will be done without challenging France's independence, because you are well aware of the fact, and I have said it already, the NATO of 2009 is not the same as the NATO of 1966.
Observers predict France's return will reinvigorate efforts to reform the transatlantic organization. But doubts arise on how much of European elements France can add to NATO. Sarkozy has said it's time to climb back into NATO's control room. France is coming back just when the U.S. needs it. President Barack Obama says the U.S. will send an additional 17,000 combat troops to Afghanistan in the spring. He hopes the move will reinvigorate NATO participation in the U.S.-led operation, now in its 8th year. NATO currently heads a 62,000-strong multinational force from 42 countries in Afghanistan. U.S. soldiers make up nearly half of the NATO-led force. Other large contingents are from Britain, Germany, Canada, France, and Italy. A number of nations maintain only a symbolic presence. Austria and Georgia have just one soldier each. Barack Obama plans to shift their power base from Iraq to Afghanistan, and he's calling on NATO to do more to contain the resurgent Taliban. But some NATO members aren't listening. Canada and the Netherlands have already set deadlines for their withdrawal. Other allies, including Germany, Italy, and Spain, have restricted their soldiers to peaceful western and northern regions of the country.
NATO's military action in Afghanistan reflects their security concept has changed. NATO realizes the threats to them may not be on their own soil. NATO's ability to advance Afghanistan's security and stability has become a litmus test of the alliance's effectiveness.
Some critics say NATO's ambitions already outstrip its resources. NATO may find the challenge is not just to find a new strategy, but to make it credible.
Well, this much is clear. NATO is still struggling between its goals and its abilities. Members have floated a multitude of extra tasks and threats to help tackle. These include climate change, mass migration, Islamist militants, and also energy security. The next big project could be multiple futures to help identify more threats in the coming years that underpin a new strategic concept. This could start after the summit in Strasbourg this week, and some people say that it could take 18 months.